No, is near to the head of that, not quite. The head of it is a body of water called Lynn Canal, and the town of Skagway is there. And Skagway is where the gold prospectors in the days of '98 took off to get to the Yukon where the gold was being discovered. But anyhow, I have lived my life so far, not all of my life, in Juneau, and living in the same home. I had an older brother. I had two older brothers and an older sister and a younger sister. The oldest brother is gone. The youngest sister is gone. The next two, my next older brother and my older sister, were both born in Juneau, which was the territory of Alaska. And it gave me a great advantage, having been born in Seattle. It has lasted all my life. If you were born in the territory of Alaska, you're not eligible to run for President of the United States.
Oh, good.
But I was born in the state of Washington. I've been eligible.
Very clever of you.
Life. I've never determined to proceed to seek the opportunity.
Yeah, by vote.
Well, anyhow.
When did you hook up with the 10th?
I'm just about to tell you that. I went to the University of Washington for my undergraduate studies. The first 2 years I was 5'8". That is, I had a very good grade average. Second 2 years I had learned to ski. And my grade average went down, but I had one heck of a time skiing. And I even got so far as to have Pacific Northwest Ski Association instructor's certificate. I never taught professionally. I taught for free young people in Juneau for quite a long time, so I did teach skiing, but not professionally. My degree, which was in general studies, I got in March of 1941. The University of Washington had a quarter system, and I stayed out 1 year to earn money to keep going. But then I took extra credit hours and finished in March rather than June. And then in March of 1941, the draft was breathing down the neck of any young person. As long as you were in college, you were exempt or deferred. But I, being an avid skier, I had a friend who was driving to Sun Valley, Idaho, which was a newly formed tremendous resort, and they offered so-called college weeks, and for $30 you could go to Sun Valley for a week, get a room in the Challenger Inn, get your meals, get ski tow tickets, and get lessons.
That's a good deal.
Pretty good deal. So I did that. But before I went, I had a ride with a friend who was driving that way. I bought a return ticket on the train. And stayed in Sun Valley till I had 10 cents to my name. And then I got on the train to Seattle, and I walked down the street to the draft office and said, I'm ready to go. And of course, it was supposed to be for 1 year.
No such luck.
After Pearl Harbor, it lasted for me for almost 5. But, so I was drafted and sent to Fort Lewis, Washington, to the Washington, Oregon National Guard regiment that had been activated, and took basic training. And I was a full-fledged buck private. But I wanted to teach skiing. I wanted to be skiing. And I read that Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, who was the commanding general of the Alaska Command, was going to start a ski operation in McKinley Park. I knew that my father, who was the 30-year head of the Alaska Governmental Mining Office. We called it Commissioner of Mines at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Had worked with General Buckner because oil was in very short supply, and shipping for oil was even in more short supply because of our commitment to aid to England. And so he persuaded Buckner and the governor, who was a good friend of my father's and mine too later, to power the newly built military bases in Alaska, primarily Elmendorf Field at Anchorage, Fort Richardson at Anchorage, which are adjoined, and Ladd Field, the Air Corps base in Fairbanks, to power them with coal-fired steam plants, because all of those places are on the Alaska Railroad, and there are huge deposits of coal along the route of the Alaska Railroad at one point or another. And so I knew that Buckner was acquainted with my father. And one day, in the bulletin board on my company headquarters on Fort Lewis, there was a notice. Volunteers wanted to go to Alaska. So I turned out for the interview, and it turned out it became, the interviewer was a major from the West by God, Virginia, National Guard. And the West Virginia people are coal miners. And he asked me where I was from and so forth, and I told him what my father did, and he said he was very interested in coal mining. So I was able to tell him, at least vicariously, about coal mining in Alaska. And so I was chosen. There were three of us, a sergeant, a corporal, and Buck Private Stewart, to make this trip to Alaska, which was on a little freighter that was to sail from the port of Tacoma on the way to Sitka. At Sitka, which is about 75 miles southwest of Juneau, they were building a new naval air station, and a battalion of the West Virginia National Guard was based there to guard the shores, another battalion in Kodiak at a new naval base to guard its shores, and a third battalion in Dutch Harbor to guard the shores. And so I sailed on this freighter. The three of us, the sergeant, the corporal, and I, were to stand guard 24 hours a day, 4 on and 8 off, on the bow of a little freighter that sailed out of Tacoma to go to Sitka, and in the forward hold, which had its only access, a hatch covered with heavy canvas, a secret shipment, and we were to be the guards over that shipment. We didn't know what it was. By the way, it turned out later that it was the first radar machine being sent to Alaska.
Oh my goodness.
We sailed the ordinary sea route to Juneau or Sitka is what's called the Inside Passage. It goes inside the whole chain of islands that stretches from Vancouver Island, or Puget Sound, Vancouver Island, and on up to Skagway. And we sailed instead on the outside. I'm not certain exactly why, but we sailed on in the Gulf of Alaska. The ship made all of 4 knots an hour, and what was ordinarily a 4-day trip took us 2 full weeks. And there was a storm, and we rolled 40 degrees.
Oh.
And we got to Sitka, and at Sitka, I was a casual, that is an unassigned private. And so I drew an assignment to M Company of the West by God Virginia National Guard. And in the whole company, which had a complement of maybe 350 individuals, a captain, a first lieutenant who was the executive officer, and 4 second lieutenants who were the platoon leaders, And of all the 350 individuals involved, there were 2 college graduates, the captain and I. And that first sergeant had no use for what I'm sure he considered to be a smart-ass private. I cleaned the latrines, I picked up the cigarette butts, I peeled the potatoes, I mopped the floors. I did every dirty job that sergeant could find for me. And, but I was in Alaska. In the meantime, the imminence of war with Japan was upon us. And General Buckner, I didn't deal with him directly about this, but I knew that he had to give up on his idea of a ski facility at McKinney Park, which was going to be a recreational facility for the soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't to teach around there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to give up on that idea. But Pearl Harbor came on December 7/41, and I determined that I didn't really belong in that outfit, in that position. So a cadre of officers came traveling through, examining candidates for officer candidate school. And I turned out. At the University of Washington, which is a land-grant college, it was required to take 1 year of reserve officer training.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a year of reserve officer training, and I had done well in the program, and, but I didn't intend to continue with it. They tried to persuade me to do so, but I said, no, if there's need, I'll volunteer at the time it came. Anyhow, I was selected. And so a master sergeant and I, a buck private, and a buck sergeant, all went to Fort Benning in late January of 42. And I, fortunately for me, I had, there was a colonel, a bird colonel, a full colonel, who was the assistant commander of the base, of the school at Fort Benning, Georgia. And he was a blood nephew of a woman who was married to my uncle. So she was my aunt by marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And she wrote to him and told him that I was coming. And when I arrived at Fort Benning, he and his wife very cordially invited me to their home for dinner. And he said, "This is a tough program, young man, but if you succeed, you tell me where you want to go and I'll see that you get there." So I did succeed, and I said I want to go to what had been newly formed, the 1st Battalion Reinforced of the 87th Mountain Infantry at Fort Lewis. And so as a young second lieutenant, I reported to Fort Lewis.
How had you heard about the
Well,
87?
it was sited at Fort Lewis, which is adjacent to Tacoma, not to Seattle. It's
Mm-hmm.
a little further from Seattle. But among others was a man named John Woodward, who was here today.
Mm-hmm.
And I had not met John Woodward, but he was well known. I did meet him, as a matter of fact. He ran a ski shop at the Bon Marché, and I went to the ski shop and met him there. And he had been a reserve officer trained at the University of Washington.
Okay.
And in March of 1940, he had been called up to active duty and started a ski unit, not a company, not a formal ski trooper organization, but they skied. It was a ski patrol sort of thing. I've forgotten how many men were in it, and he was the leader of it. He was a well-known ski racer in the Seattle area. And I had heard about that, and I had kind of kept touch, and I had heard that there was a ski unit at Fort Lewis, and that's what I volunteered for. And so I joined it, and I quickly found out it was not only a ski outfit, but also for the officers was a cavalry outfit. The commander of the 1st Battalion, 87th Mountain Infantry Reinforced, And mind you, that reinforced means that they had units attached to a battalion strength organization that ordinarily wouldn't be part of a small unit like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like medics, motor pool, supply officers, and mules. And the commander was a full colonel named Onslow, O-N-S-L-O-W-S, Rolfe, R-O-L-F-E. And Colonel Rolfe was a cavalry trained officer. So he required that all of the officers receive training in horseback riding. And I had never been on a horse. So we spent 3 weeks at 4:30 every afternoon for about 2 hours. All the officers had to learn how to ride horses. And much to my astonishment, 3 weeks later, I was jumping a log about as high as this table
Oh my.
on the back of a horse with the reins tied and controlling the horse with my knees.
Bravo.
Bravo. But anyhow, it was the ski troops. And one day, I think it was early September, I should mention perhaps kind of a unique thing that occurred. In the summer of 42, we were called to the parade ground to march in formation because Franklin D. Roosevelt was going to review the troops.
Really?
His daughter, who was a woman named Anna Boettiger, B-O-E-T-T-I-N-G-E-R, and her husband was one of the publishers of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, and she lived on Mercer Island in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And Roosevelt came to visit his daughter there, and he made an appearance at Fort Lewis, and so we paraded for President Roosevelt, which was quite a privilege. Anyhow, one day in September, I was advised, along with about 10 other officers and 20 selected non-commissioned officers, to be ready to go on a train at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And so we packed our duffel and got on the train and went to Camp Edwards, Massachusetts, which is out on Cape Cod.
Mm-hmm.
And our mission there was to learn how to rock climb and how to teach rock climbing. Camp Edwards.
Had you ever rock climbed before?
Well, I had scrambled up the sides of many mountains in my home in Juneau. I had been a goat hunter, and I lived up where the goats lived as much as I could. But I had no formal rope party technique. I never had pounded a piton into a crack in the rocks. I had not done technical rock climbing, but I had done a lot of mountain climbing.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was that we had some expert mountain rock climbers with us in that detachment. Swiss, I remember one particular famous Swiss guide who was among the people. And on Cape Cod there are dry washes. Do you know what that is?
No.
Dry wash is where there are freshets, I mean, there'd be heavy rainfall like a thunderstorm, and the country is all sand deposited by the ocean section, and so there's a dry wash which water has rushed through, and then which no longer has water in it after the freshet, and they're fairly steep on the banks, so we cut trees growing around, small pine trees, diameter maybe 3 or 4 inches, and we erected them and nailed them together vertically, nailed them together with cross pieces behind them, and then cut notches into them so that we could traverse them in rope party technique. And there were handholds and footholds little notches in the woods. And we learned how not only to rock climb, but to teach rock climbing. And in about November, I know it was a little before Thanksgiving, we moved up to Lincoln, New Hampshire, which is near Franconia Notch.
Mm-hmm.
And there our instructions were to teach rock climbing to the 36th Infantry Division from Texas, which was assigned up there. And the division was, and our teaching contingent, 10 officers and about 20 enlisted men, divided in half. In the morning, half of us went up to the Great Stone Face in Franconia Notch and climbed on the granite cliffs. Not very high. We usually wouldn't go more than about 20 or 30 feet up the steep granite cliffs. And the other half would stay back in the town and study Norwegian. They had little books published with useful phrases, English and Norwegian, and phonetically how to pronounce the Norwegian. And in the afternoons we would reverse. We who had been climbing would go back to town and study Norwegian, and the other half would go back up to the mountain. So we were there until, I think, the end of December. I had one interesting experience. I was sharing a room in the Lincoln Hotel with another second lieutenant. His name is David Rayback, R-A-B-A-K. We remain good friends to this day. I saw him last week in Seattle. And there were some very nice local women from the town of Lincoln who were volunteering for the war effort and who acted as maids for our rooms, changed the bedding and did all the maid work, but they were local volunteers. And one of them invited David Rayback and me to her home for Thanksgiving dinner. Lovely lady. Her husband had been the governor of New Hampshire, and he was in Washington at the time that we were there. And when Dwight Eisenhower became the President of the United States, he was Eisenhower's chief of staff. His name was Sherman Adams.
My goodness.
And his wife was Rachel Adams, and she is the one for whom he acquired a gift of a vicuna coat, which brought down his office. He was accused of accepting gifts that weren't allowed to be given to people in the president's office, and he had to resign as chief of staff to Eisenhower because of a gift to his wife of a vicuna coat. But anyhow, she was our maid and served us a lovely Thanksgiving dinner. He was not there for that. That's just an aside, but an interesting little anecdote of a military experience. And then, well, just to put a little footnote to that, about 6 years ago, the reunion of the 10th Mountain Division was held in Sun Valley, Idaho, 1998. And I went to that reunion, and there was a major there by the name of Albert Jackman, Jackman. Albert Jackman had been the leader of this detachment that taught climbing and studied Norwegian in New Hampshire back in 42. And he and I got together and had a visit and had a cup of tea at Sun Valley. And he said, "Did you know what that operation was all about?" And I said, "Well, I assumed that the Army was contemplating a landing on the Norwegian shore, and they had to have people not only trained in rock climbing, but also knowing a little bit of Norwegian so they could converse simply with the local residents." No. He said it was a feint that they had deliberately not tried to keep it secret,
Mm-hmm.
and they knew they were German agents. And as a result of the Germans finding out about this operation, they sent 2 whole divisions to Norway to repulse the attack, while the 36th Infantry Division went to North Africa to fight Rommel.
Oh my gosh. A successful feint.
Yes. Well, so that's how I got into the mountain infantry. And from New Hampshire, we didn't go back to Colorado. As a matter of fact, the Camp Hale wasn't ready yet.
Mm-hmm.
We were still headquartered at Fort Lewis, Washington. The whole detachment was sent to Wisconsin, a place called Sparta, Wisconsin, and there's an army post there, camp, and I can't remember the name of it, where we took off for northern Michigan, the North Michigan Peninsula, Iron River, Iron Mountain waters meet, and just north of there is a body of water, large body of water called Lake Gogebic, Gogebic. It's just south of Lake Superior. And this was the winter of 1943, 42, 43. It was cold. And our mission was to teach cross-country skiing and winter camping to the 2nd Infantry Division, also from Texas. And we were split up in groups to teach winter skiing and camping, cross-country skiing and winter camping to the soldiers and men of that division. I have some fairly vivid recollections. In the daytime, it reached 25 below zero. At nighttime, it reached 55 below zero. And on maneuvers at Lake Gogebic, we camped out at night and were not allowed to have fires. It was chilly. We had double sleeping bags. We had a mummy case and an outer down bag, and we had a pad to put on this in this mountain tent. And the mountain tent immediately frosted up on the inside. The whole inside was a blanket of frost. And if you didn't put your socks over your belly inside the sleeping bag, they would freeze from the moisture that had collected in them.
Poorly ventilated tents.
And the ski boots, we had a little brush to brush the snow off of it, and you put it up under your armpits inside the sleeping bag if you expected to be able to put your boots on unfrozen in the mornings.
Had Alaska prepared you for this in the slightest?
Where I lived, it never went below zero. In Fairbanks, it goes way below zero.
Mm-hmm.
But in Juneau, it's on the sea,
Uh-huh.
and it's unusual to go down as low as 5 above. So no, I was not exactly prepared for that. But I had done enough skiing, and I had 2 men in my squad, my teaching squad. One was a man named Ralph Townsend, and one was a man named Wendell Broomhall. Both of them had been North American cross-country ski champions. So we had expert cross-country skiers. I learned from them about how to cross-country ski. But I remember on this maneuver, we set out one day, and the colonel in command of the regiment to which I was assigned was with me.
Mm-hmm.
And in that country, they also have dry washes, except they're not as dry as they are in Massachusetts on Cape Cod. And there's ordinarily be a little creek running in the bottom of the dry wash with steep walls, maybe as high as the walls of this room,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a little bit higher. And of course, at 55 below, there's no water running. It's all frozen.
All ice.
And there was dry snow. Well, that regiment, which had roughly 3,000 men, a column of threes, 1,000 men each, was following me and the colonel. We got to the dry wash. An hour later, I had the colonel up on the other side. What we basically learned was that it was literally impossible to fight in weather like that.
Mm-hmm.
It took all your energy to exist,
Mm-hmm.
to keep warm and dry. The motor pools couldn't operate. The oil froze in the pans of the vehicles at night when they were sitting. And
You had left the mules back in Washington?
Pardon?
You had left the mules back in Washington, I take it?
The mules weren't mules are for mountains,
Mm-hmm.
and this is not mountainous country. This is winter.
Mm-hmm.
And the only soldiers who have ever operated successfully in those kinds of conditions were the Finns and the Russians.
Right.
One of the men in my squad was a Finn who had been in the war between the Finns and the Russians and did ski for days in that kind of weather, that kind of terrain
Mm-hmm.
in Finland. But basically what we learned was you can't fight in 55 below degree weather. And
Were you using the same skis for downhill and cross-country with different settings? Or were you using different skis for downhill and cross-country?
They were basically downhill skis, but they had a cable binding.
Uh-huh.
So you could set the cable, there were little hooks on the side of the ski. You could set the cable in a hook back near your heel,
Mm-hmm.
and that would keep your heel down on the ski. Or you could set the cable at a hook up near the balls of your feet, and so you could lift your heel.
Okay.
So that's what we did for the cross-country skiing. Well, we finished that in March, and in the meantime, Camp Hale had been built. And so when we came back from the detachment, we joined there wasn't yet a division. The division wasn't formed until about 6 months later.
Right.
Still the 87th Mountain Infantry, but it had been enlarged from a battalion to a regiment. And we arrived in Camp Hale, I think, in April or something like that. And in May, or about the end of May, our regiment was ordered to Monterey Bay, in California.
Mm-hmm.
And there we were instructed to undertake training in amphibious landings. And they had Marine, and I'm talking about the United States Marines, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. The United States Marines taught us how to make amphibious landings. And as an exercise, we got on board the ships that were used at that time, marine transports, sailed down to San Diego, and captured successfully the Del Coronado Hotel on the beach of San Diego. But we, the landing craft, let me go ahead a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Today, the Navy has great ships called landing ship docks. They're big vessels, 800 feet long, something like that. And they have a place where beach landing vessels, which are boats with a flat bow with a ramp that can drop down, and the soldiers can go out through the front when it reaches the beach.
Uh-huh.
Not necessarily the dry beach. They get stuck on the sand 100 yards from shore, and you wade off in full gear up to your chest to get ashore, and you're holding your rifles up. Anyhow, they didn't have vessels as advanced as that. They had the boats, but they were on davits up on the top deck, They would drop them down over the sides, drop cargo nets, big rope cargo nets over the side, and you would climb down the nets in full gear and climb into the boats that were bobbing up and down up against the ship.
Sounds treacherous.
It is treacherous, and when they were doing that when they made the landings at D-Day in Normandy, and some of those boats sank.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, we were trained to do that. And then early in July, about the middle of July, I guess maybe it was towards the end of July, we sailed out of San Francisco on that kind of a vessel. And we had not been told what our destination was.
Were there rumors?
Pardon?
Were there rumors?
Well, shortly we heard a radio broadcast from Tokyo, from the woman who was called Tokyo Rose. And she said, "Welcome. You're going to Kiska, where you will find a warm welcome."
Oh.
So we were going to Kiska. And we went to the Aleutian Islands, and we landed about the center of the chain, east and west, from the base of it at Dutch Harbor to the outer reach of it, which was the island of Attu. And in the meantime, the Japanese had occupied. They had come, I don't know if you know this little part of the story, it's a diversion.
Mm-hmm.
The Japanese intended to confront the American Navy in a full-scale battle. But they attempted to draw off the strength of the American Navy by sending a smaller fleet to the Aleutian Islands. They were not only intended to draw off the bulk of the American naval force, but also to capture a foothold on Alaska at Dutch Harbor, from which they could launch attacks on the mainland, down the coast to the Seattle area,
Mm-hmm.
and San Francisco,
Mm-hmm.
and inland from Alaska. Well, what the Japanese did not know was that the Americans had broken the Japanese secret code, and they knew what they were up to. So they were not tricked into sending a naval force up to Dutch Harbor,
Mm-hmm.
up to the Aleutians. And in fact, they caught the Japanese at Midway. And the Battle of Midway, which was decisive,
Mm-hmm.
they sank the Japanese aircraft carriers. And they lost their capacity for naval warfare
Mm-hmm.
at the Battle of Midway. And so if you're reading about the history of World War II, you have to take into account the decisive Battle of Midway. In the meantime, a smaller fleet that had one, I don't remember exactly what was in it. I think there was one aircraft carrier and 2 or 3 cruisers and numbers of destroyers. They went to Dutch Harbor, and from the aircraft carrier they launched their planes and they bombed Dutch Harbor. Unexpectedly, they had air defense arise from some point west of Dutch Harbor. There's a well-known book about that phase of the war. It's called The 1,000-Mile War, written by a man named Brian Garfield. And the Americans had established an air base a couple hundred miles west of Dutch Harbor. And the fighter planes that were there rose up and combated with the Japanese planes. So the Japanese, after bombing Dutch Harbor for a couple of days, moved out to the end of the Aleutian Islands and captured the island of Attu, which is the westernmost, 1,000 miles west of Dutch Harbor,
Mm-hmm.
and Kiska, which is about 800 miles west of Dutch Harbor. And the troops that they had thought they would be able to set ashore at Dutch Harbor, they set ashore at Attu and mainly at Kiska. Kiska was their main base because Kiska has a very fine harbor known as Kiska Harbor. And it's an open square, sort of a rectangular harbor open at the sea end, but opposite the opening is Little Kiska, another island, which protects it from the storms that come off the Bering Sea and the Pacific Oceans, north and south of the Aleutian Chain. And so they landed their troops there. The American military, American government, was not happy about advertising that the Japanese had captured American soil, which indeed they had. And they were determined to dislodge them at the earliest opportunity. But it took quite a while for them to put together a force to go out there. But finally, in April of 1943, they sent a regular infantry division to Attu, where the Japanese had, I think it's somewhere around 3,000 men. And it was a tragic operation. It was successful in the sense that the Japanese were defeated. And they all died except for about 25 men who were wounded and incapable of committing suicide. Those who weren't killed by American action did commit suicide. But for America, it was also a tragedy because those men went out there not prepared for the weather conditions. And there was snow. The Aleutian Islands are like southeast Alaska. It's not cold, but it's below freezing in the winter, and there's quite a lot of snow, and it's wet snow. And those soldiers went out there with ordinary GI shoes. Some of our people that were in the Quartermaster Corps and designing special mountain and winter equipment for our outfit tried to tell the Army to equip the soldiers going to Attu similarly with proper footgear. They didn't. And that result was the battle at Attu lasted about 3 weeks. It was heavily contested. And the American soldiers suffered more casualties, not death, but injuries from basically what you call trench foot. Because they stood in snow-filled trenches, never changed their shoes and socks for 3 weeks. If you know what it's like to have wet gear on your feet and never change your shoes and socks, that's what's called trench foot. What the forces, the Allied forces in World War I got because they were in trenches in France and Germany that were constantly filled with water in the bottom, and they never had dry feet. And that's what happened at Attu. And it was terrible. Men lost their toes, men lost their feet from being in snow and cold and wet for 3 weeks. So, with that bad experience at Attu, while it was successful in driving off the Japanese on that island, that left Kiska with a major Japanese force, over 5,000 men. And so they determined to send our regiment to Kiska. And that's why we got the amphibious training at Monterey Bay and on the Pacific coast, sailed out of San Francisco to drive the Japanese off of the island of Kiska. Well, we went to Adak, which is about halfway between Dutch Harbor and Kiska. And we had a beach landing there, and there were no facilities. Adak subsequently was built up to be an appreciable port for the Navy. There's a hospital and there's a community there, and it became quite developed. But when we went there, there was nothing. We landed in our assault landing craft, and they were caught by the beach, 200 or 300 yards offshore. We were off the bows, the depressed bows of the ships, waded ashore and water up to our chest with full gear, got on shore, not very comfortable. It was early in August.
Mm-hmm.
And we were told we would be there for about 6 weeks, getting ready to land on Kiska.
Mm-hmm.
3 days later, we left for Kiska. We had gotten some fires, and we had dried our clothes, and we were better off.
You were a second lieutenant, right?
Yes.
So did you had a platoon or
I
a
think
couple
by
of
this,
platoons
by
at your
this time I
disposal?
had become a first lieutenant.
Okay. What were your specific responsibilities at that point?
An infantry platoon,
Mm-hmm.
35 men, 4 squads, 4 8-man squads, and plus non-commissioned sergeants. And I was leading the platoon in battle against the Japanese. When we landed on Kiska, which is an island about 25 miles long, and it's the harbors are on the northeast side of the island. The island lies sort of southeast and northwest,
Mm-hmm.
and the Kiska harbor is sort of in the center, and that's where the main Japanese base was. But there's some other harbors towards southeast corner of the island. 2 of our battalions from the 87th, let me say something else. The 87th was the lead unit, but we had a couple of other regiments, a division
Uh-huh.
behind us.
Mm-hmm.
And in the attack force, there were 2 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, and about 50 destroyers and DE boats, destroyer escorts. And we landed, 2 of the battalions landed in the center of the island, right over the ridge from Kiska Harbor. The ridge is about 3,500 feet high,
Mm-hmm.
fairly steep slopes.
The dry wash all over again.
Pardon?
The dry wash all over again.
Well, except these are rocky. The islands are volcanic. They have quite a lot of. There are no trees in the whole Aleutian Islands, but there's brush down at the sea level, and then it turns to grass and moss as you get up to basically above timberline type of vegetation. The 2 regiments landed there. The 2 battalions, the 2nd and 3rd battalions of the 87th Mountain Infantry Regiment. And my battalion, the 1st battalion, was held at sea on that first day, and the next day we landed, at the head of the island there's a 4,000-foot volcano, Kiska, and we landed at the base of the volcano that was towards the south, towards the harbor. And the strategic concept was that the first 2 battalions would engage the Japanese in battle, and then our battalion would come in on the flank
Mm-hmm.
and attack the Japanese from the flank, which is where they're which a military unit is most vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was a tragedy. It began to rain that first night, and there was fog, as there always is in the Aleutian Islands. And the order had been given that don't move at night. If it moves, it's a Jap. Shoot it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, some poor kid had to get up and take a leak. And the 2 adjoining battalions, their communications, the company communications were back to their battalion headquarters,
Uh-huh.
not between the companies. And so somebody from this company saw the man move here and shot at him, and it started a battle. And before it was stopped, there were 15 dead men. And 2 or 3 men wounded, most of them were killed.
Mm-hmm.
Friendly fire. We were not aware of it at the time. When we went ashore early the next morning, the 1st Battalion, at the base of the volcano, it was like battle conditions. Of course, we came in on the boats. The boats got stuck out a couple hundred yards offshore, and we jumped off into the water and waded ashore. We had been told that the Japanese had no barbed wire. Well, American barbed wire is made in an apron form. You have barbed wire, and barbed wire. And it's maybe that high off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Japanese didn't do that. There's heavy beach grass, heavy blades of grass, maybe 1.5 feet high. And they had barbed wire stretched right at the top of the grass, where it couldn't be seen in the aerial photographs.
Mm.
But when we got there, it was about 10 or 12 feet across, fixed on stakes. You couldn't crawl under it because of the heavy grass. And if you tried to go over it, they had caves that had dug into the hillsides at either end of that beach that had machine gun emplacements in them that could fire right down the line of that barbed wire. So they anticipated that we would have 75% casualties in that battle. It was, I suppose you would call it spooky, because those 2 battleships and those 6 heavy cruisers and those destroyers were all firing their big guns on the shore, just ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
And as we moved up the mountainside, the barrage would land up ahead of us. So it appeared to be a battle. But spookily, we were not getting small arms fire. And we didn't know what to make of it. We were told, well, the Japanese have a whole system of tunnels back in the harbor area. And they probably had retreated in their tunnels in an effort to ambush the Americans, not present themselves until the Americans were off guard, as it were. And it was 36 hours before the realization came that the Japanese had evacuated the island.
Completely.
Completely. There were no Japanese on the island. But we didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why that battle took place between the 2nd and 3rd Battalion in the dark of night and with the rain and fog, thinking that there were Japanese there.
This was the first time that you had led men into combat and experienced combat yourself, yeah?
That's right.
How was that experience for you?
Well, you do what you have to do. You don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel fear at all, or were you intent upon?
I was a sort of a curiosity fear. What's happening? And we climbed the mountain and got up on the top of the ridge, which is over 3,000 feet. And the rain came in, and we dug slip trenches, and they were sort of on a slope. And when I woke in the morning, my feet and my sleeping bag were all in a puddle of water about that deep. And it was not very comfortable. There was one lieutenant in one of the other platoons, was a man named my senior moment, I don't know his name perfectly well. Anyhow, he was, we had, when we landed, we had faces, grease paint. We had 3 colors of grease paint: mud, sand, and grass. And we had grease painted all over our faces so that our faces wouldn't be showing up. And this officer was a fellow platoon leader. On that next morning, up on top of the island, and he had a kind of a bald head, and he had taken his helmet off, and the grease paint was running down his forehead down his face, and he's sitting there like this, saying, "Oh, I'm miserable. Oh, I'm miserable." And he was. All of us were. But by about that time, around noon of the second day, we realized there were no Japanese and there were no enemies to be fought. It wasn't the end of our problems because the Japanese had crude booby traps. They would have a can of TNT and a board with a nail and a fulminated mercury cap, which is like what you have in a hand grenade, and that sets off the TNT.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you threw a hand grenade with just the TNT, nothing would happen.
Right.
But with the fulminated mercury cap stuck down in it, it explodes, and that causes the TNT to explode. And they had homemade booby traps with these cans dug down into the soil, and a board with a nail, and with a fulminated mercury cap there. And not very many, but a couple of guys stepped on one of those boards and took their legs off, killed them. And we had one incident of friendly fire. There was a Canadian artillery element in the landing force, and they were practicing with their guns, and a couple of their shells fell short and hit in one of our mess tents and killed the kitchen crew. And so that, it was not without its problems. But those marine landing craft, ships that put us ashore, took off because they were needed elsewhere in the war effort, basically in the South Pacific. And so we were on the island, as it were, marooned, without any shipping.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first ship came in about 3 weeks after we got there.
Mm.
And there had been massive operations of unloading supplies, equipment, ammunition, guns, everything in the harbor area. And there was a big, and they had bulldozers and tractors, some of which would get stuck in the mud. Lots of operations handling the equipment and supplies. And while we were, the infantry units were camped up on the upper elevations of the island. Well, one or two ships came in and took some people off that had some priorities. For example, there was a man named Monty Atwater. And Monty was the company commander of Headquarters Company, the 1st Battalion. And he was an avalanche control expert. And in the meantime, the division had been activated at Camp Hale.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of snow on the mountains coming in the fall and the winter, and he was wanted back there to help with avalanche control. And so he left on the first ship, and the battalion commander, who was a man named Lieutenant Colonel Ross Wilson, his son Larry Wilson is here at the reunion today, and Ross Wilson appointed me to be the company commander of Headquarters Company, 1st Battalion. And I was promoted to the grade of captain, and my rest of my service there in training in the D series at Camp Hale, and then ultimately Camp Swift and Italy.
Mm-hmm.
That was my function. I was the company commander of Headquarters Company, 1st Battalion, and I was also the adjutant. The adjutant is the person responsible for personnel matters,
mm-hmm.
sending out people that have to go to a hospital or some other assignment, bringing in new people, and keeping track of the personnel records of everybody.
As captain, did you participate in B series, or were you overseeing?
Oh, indeed, I did. Indeed, I did. But basically that was the end of the Kiska operation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I should say something probably that may be of interest and leave Kiska behind after that.
Mm-hmm.
The mystery of how the Japanese got away. 45 years later, there was a sergeant in our regiment by the name of Sherman Smith. Sherman Smith was an inveterate souvenir hunter. And he did something that I would never have done. He went into the Japanese tunnels. All he had was a plumber's candle, didn't have a flashlight. Saw tripwires on the floor, and he knew it was booby traps.
Mm-hmm.
But he still explored it. He discovered a Japanese sun flag about 4 or 5 feet long, 3 feet high, hanging on a wall. And he took it down from the wall and folded it up, put it in his pocket, and took it home. There was nobody in our group that could translate the writing that was on it. And his home was in Seattle. And when eventually we left the island in December, we went back to the Seattle area, and we had a couple of weeks of leave. And then we didn't go to the Seattle area. We landed in the Seattle area, and we went by train to Colorado Springs.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, they had filled out the division, and it had the 86th Infantry Regiment, and the 85th, and the 90th, which had had no mountain training.
Right.
So after we got to Colorado Springs, they switched. They brought the 90th down to Colorado Springs, and we went up to Camp Hale.
The 90th brought in at that point because they had anticipated the 75% casualties in the 87th?
I presume so. I was not at a high enough rank level to be a participant in those decisions.
Uh-huh.
But I suspected that's what it was. Then we went to Italy. We came to Camp Swift. We had further weapons training. Went to Italy, had the battles there, and the war ended there. Came home. Smith came back to Seattle. And sometime about 1980, almost 40 years later, he took that sun flag out of his belongings and took it to a Japanese friend in Seattle and had him translate it. And it said it belonged to a man named Karo Keoru Katsukabe, who was a mountaineer. So he wrote to a mountaineering organization, the address for which he obtained, in Tokyo, and said, "Do you know a man named Karo Katsukabe?" And he got a letter back from Katsukabe, who was the secretary of the organization, and who spoke quite good English. And he established a correspondence with him, and he said, "I have your sun flag. My wife and I will come to Japan and give it back to you." And they did. And he not only gave it back to him in his little town where he grew up, but they went to 5 other towns. He was so enamored of the process of being presented the flag by American soldiers, former American soldier, that they had 6 presenters. And then he invited Katsukabe to come to America, and he came to the Seattle reunion of the 10th in 1986, the fall of 1986, and I met him there. And among other things, we talked about their escape.
Mm-hmm.
What had happened was there was an American naval blockade of Kiska.
Mm-hmm.
2 cruisers and 5 destroyers circled the island about 30 miles offshore all year long. And then there were planes, PBYs, that flew out of the Dutch harbor in the Adak area that bombed Kiska. And they spotted a submarine at the island around the island of Amchitka, which is between Attu and Kiska. Amchitka is it's now an American Air Force base. They saw a Japanese ship, so they radioed the position of it from their plane to an American submarine and sank the ship. 1,000 men, replacement troops on board. Everybody lost. Well, so the Japanese on Kiska were isolated. They couldn't be resupplied, and they had technicians. They had a two-man submarine base with 6 two-man submarines, and they had technicians to operate the submarine base. They had radio jamming signal equipment, and they regularly jammed the American Army communication system throughout the whole of Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only long-distance communication in Alaska, the territory of Alaska at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a good friend who was in the Signal Corps for the Army, and he said they had a lot of trouble when the Japanese jamming their signal.
Mm-hmm.
They also had a small engineering contingent. They were going to build an airfield on what's called Kiska Head. And they did spend a lot of time, but they had bare minimum equipment. They had a truck, and I guess maybe a tractor, but a lot of what they were doing was by hand. And they dug a lot of tunnels because they had to get away from the American bombing. Well, Kasakabe had been reared in Kent, Washington, to the age of about 8 or 9, and he spoke English very well. And he was assigned to man a listening station on the top of the ridge behind Kiska Harbor. All 7 of the skippers of those American ships reported sighting moving targets on the radar. They fired hundreds of rounds of ammunition. This was in late July.
Uh-huh.
And the targets were over the horizon from visual sight.
Mm-hmm.
They rushed over there and they found nothing.
Mm-hmm.
No debris, no sign of any ship. But they were communicating among themselves in English, not in code. Kasakabe was sitting up on top of the island, and he heard them. And they said, we're going to withdraw for 12 hours to rearm and refuel and resupply. And there was a Japanese rescue fleet of 2 cruisers and 4 destroyers standing about 300 miles offshore, awaiting a coded signal from the Japanese on the island that it was safe to come in.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Kasakabe picked up that message, those ships left, our American ships left for 12 hours. They sent the coded message, which was AB. They rushed in at full speed into Kiska Harbor, and in 55 minutes, they took 5,500 men off the shore aboard the ships to save them up.
Weren't there a few men left behind?
No men.
0.
I don't think they even left bodies behind.
Mm-hmm.
They took the bodies. I'm not certain about that. But there were no, the only live thing was a dog. Well, it's 20 minutes to 12.
Okay.
And I was supposed to have a men's luncheon at 11:30.
Oh my goodness.
That's a
So I think that we had just disembarked.
Pardon?
We had just disembarked from Kiska when we left off.
Come home from Kiska.
Right.
Are you more interested, KK, in the Italian campaign, or do you want anything about Camp Hale before that?
How about your most vivid memories of Hale, and then we can travel to Italy?
Okay. When we came back from the 87th Mountain Infantry Regiment, came back from Kiska, we had a few days, had a couple of weeks leave, and went to Camp Carson, Colorado. But in the meantime, the division had been formed, which it wasn't before we left. And so there were 3 regiments at Camp Hale, Colorado, that had been built for the 10th Mountain. There was the 86th and the 85th and the 90th, which had not had basic training as a ski or climbing mountain organization. So in about the next 3 weeks, we switched places. The 90th came down to Carson, Camp Carson at Colorado Springs, and we went up to Hale. And the memorable event about Hale of that winter which is now the winter of 1944, was the D series.
Right.
And the Major General Jones was the commander of the division.
Not popular.
He was no good. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And in the D series, the 85th and the 86th were the attacking forces, and the 87th was the defending force. And our commander was a wonderful man named Colonel Good, G-O-O-D-E, Pop Good. And Pop Good was a burly Scotsman who loved the bagpipes, played bagpipes, and interested some of us, including me, in taking up bagpipes. And he ordered them, but they never arrived. I never did play it. Anyhow, we had the D series, and we were defending on the ridge line behind Camp Hale, to the west of Camp Hale. And Good was had been in the same West Point class as Jones, and he was a fine soldier. I remember him saying to us, "I don't believe in written orders. I'll give oral orders, you remember them, and it works much better." Anyhow, he was defending, and he assembled maximum firepower. He had all the cooks and the service people armed, manning machine guns, so that there was a greater firepower strength, and the umpires of the battle, the sham battle, measured how much firepower there was concentrated at the points where the attackers were approaching. And right away at the beginning, he defeated them. And so Jones ordered Good and the 87th to retreat. We didn't have to in terms of the strategic exchange.
Mm-hmm.
The orders to retreat to the next ridge line behind. And still won it. I was assigned to lead a patrol in the middle of the night from the top of that ridge line down into Camp Hale to blow, to do simulation of blowing bridges and doing destruction in the camp.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there were about 20 men. One of them was Carl Stengel, who's here.
Met him, yeah.
And who later was for many years the ski coach for the University of Washington. And he was a fine skier, powerful skier, and he was the sort of led my group, but I was in charge of it. And we went down into the camp and we wreaked some havoc. And then we escaped back up the mountain, being chased. And it was a rugged experience. I would say that the D-series operation was physically more strenuous and more difficult than anything we ever did in combat.
3 weeks out in the freezing cold.
Yeah. And when it was over, General Jones had all of the officers of the division from all the elements for a critique in the theater at Camp Hale. And I can't remember now for sure. I think he gave his critique first. And then Pop Good made his critique. And we had a tough old regular Army Master Sergeant, also by the name of Jones, Sergeant Major Jones, who was the top national non-commissioned officer in the regiment. And they had made charts of positions on long sheets of paper about as tall as that door that we're looking at, and had an overlay of them, 4 or 5 charts, and each chart was fixed by a thumbtack at the top. And Sergeant Major Jones stood at the bottom of a long stick and flipped out the thumbtack, and the chart would slither down to the floor, and the next one would be exposed, showing the successive positions and relationships of the attacking and defending forces. And finally came to the last chart. The one on top of it slithered to the floor, and the last chart said, "You can't beat City Hall." That theater erupted. Every officer in that room knew exactly what he was talking about. And Jones was so mad that within the week, Pop Hood was transferred out of the division.
Oh. All ego.
And he made the landing I never saw him again, but I got reports about him, and he made the landing at D-Day in Normandy and was captured by the Germans and taken to a prisoner of war camp back in Germany, and the Germans just turned over the camp to him. And he ran the camp. I mean, the guards were there, they couldn't escape.
Right.
But he ran the camp. And I understood from American forces some people that I knew that liberated those camps, that it was clearly the best run camp in Germany.
That must have been an ambivalent experience for him.
Yeah. But fortunately for us, the Corps command above the division level recognized what had happened, and Jones got kicked out, and we got General Hayes, and he was so far superior to Jones, there's just no comparison.
He had it seemed like an immediate effect on the morale of the company.
So we, after the D series, we were training, and all of a sudden got the orders to come here to Austin to Camp Swift.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember, it was either late May or early June. We arrived at Camp Swift, and right away, the next day, we did a 25-mile march in 8 hours with full gear. It was hot. 800 men went to the hospital with heat exhaustion. I don't think any of them had sunstroke, but they had heat exhaustion, which is not as severe as sunstroke, but it's bad. Mm-hmm. And after that, all of our 25-mile, 8-hour hikes were in the middle of the night. They learned.
There is some learning curve.
The only thing the most memorable thing that I can recall about that whole experience is that in my company headquarters, and at this point I was the company commander of headquarters, company 1st Battalion, and the adjutant, the S1, responsible for all the personnel records and changes. And so I had a file drawer, and living in my file drawer was a black widow spider. And I avoided her, she avoided me. We never had a direct encounter.
It was a mutually respectful relationship.
Right. And so then eventually we went to Camp Patrick Henry in Newport News, Virginia, and shipped out. And the major part of the division shipped on the largest ocean liner that was ever built in America. And it was called, when it was built, the SS America. The name was changed, and when we went on, it was the USS West Point. And there were over 6,000 or 7,000 troops on board that ship. The 86 had gone ahead of us. They got to Italy 2 or 3 weeks before we did. And then when we landed at Naples, We stopped on the way, by the way, at the Azores to refuel.
Huh.
The ship was faster than, appreciably faster than any German submarine. So we went unescorted.
Mm-hmm.
And the German submarines had been pretty well mopped up by that time, because that was January 45. And we went to Naples and transshipped on a little vessel called the Sestriere, my regiment, the 87, or at least the 1st Battalion. I think the whole regiment was on. And we sailed out of Naples. It was an overnight trip to Livorno, and went ashore at Livorno and got in the trucks and went to the King's Own hunting ground, which is right across the highway from the leaning tower of Pisa.
And that's where you bivouacked?
That's where we bivouacked, and I had one memorable experience there personally. We had a field kitchen, and the cooks fixed a hot meal. Well, there was a low fence, as I recall, it was a rail fence along the sidewalk, and on the outside of the fence there were obviously desperate beggars, women and children, hungry. And the presence of the 10th Mountain Division in Italy was supposed to be a big dark secret. And so my company lined up with their muskets to go through the line and get a hot meal. And these poor hapless beggars.
Well, thank you. This is Tom Stewart.
If you looked up that valley on the right, in the village, it was just a small village, there was a hotel. And then there was a set of stairs. My recollection is there were at least 200 stairs that went steeply up the hillside. And at the top of the stairs, there was a 4-story building. And it was a private villa. Of course, we commandeered whatever building we wanted to use for whatever purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next morning, I think the battle started about 8 o'clock in the morning, as I recall.
Is this concurrent with the Belvedere or the Riva Ridge attack?
Pardon?
Was this concurrent with the Riva Ridge attack?
No. This was a month before
Okay.
the Belvedere operation.
End of January.
3 weeks.
Mhm.
The end of January, the 1st of February.
Okay.
It was probing the defenses that surrounded Mount Belvedere.
Mm-hmm.
And the staff people, Colonel Fowler, regimental commander, Colonel Wilson, Lieutenant Colonel Wilson, my battalion commander, and I, and the S2, that's the intelligence officer, and the S3, the operations officer, and other members of the both regimental and battalion staff, although this was just a battalion operation, went up into that building to the 4th floor and went up into a room and had field glasses and watched the operation from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
The operation took place on the opposite side of the narrow valley and in the snow, and the men were on skis and in white uniforms. It was sparsely populated with trees. It wasn't a heavy tree cover, open. And we didn't know it, but realized at the time that the Germans actually had observers dug into the snow that our people skied over.
Oh.
And when they got beyond, they called down German artillery fire from behind our people. They could tell their people by radio exactly where their shells were landing with relation to where the troops were. And it went on for several hours. I can't remember exactly how long. But I was up with those staff people watching the operation,
Mm-hmm.
and we got the pants beaten off.
Mm-hmm.
They occupied the high ground and commanding positions, our purpose was to determine their strength, and we found out about it.
Yeah. It's a devastating
Yeah.
effect.
I don't think we had very many casualties. I don't remember that we had anybody killed, but we did have people wounded, and that was the operation. And I'll jump ahead about 55 years. Around 1996, I went back to that country, and I had a journal of the day-by-day operations of the 1st Battalion, which was written by a very intelligent, highly educated clerk who was a corporal. His name was Oliver Andrews, and he taught Latin in a boys' school in New England.
Oh, I know this man.
Ollie Andrews.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I know of him anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was too busy with all the things that I had to do to attempt to keep a journal, and I asked Ollie Andrews if he would keep a journal, and he did, day by day, from the day we sailed from Newport News until the end of the war. And then when after the surrender, we went to, about 2 weeks after the surrender, we moved over to the Asanzo River to keep the Yugoslavs from coming into American-British held territory.
Mm-hmm.
And my battalion was headquartered at a village called Plezzo, Plezzo, and we were in I think some village that had been occupied by the Italian army in Mussolini's era. And Ollie got hold of a typewriter and he typed that journal. And it's about 100 pages.
Really?
And I have a copy of it, and the Resource Center has a copy of it. I checked it with Debbie, and she looked up in their file and found that it was there, because if she didn't have it, I wanted to give it to her, but she did have it.
Good, good.
Anyhow, so on this trip, I had the journal in my lap, and my companion, who was a justice of the Supreme Court in Alaska, and a very dear friend, and who speaks fluent Italian. He and his wife are devotees of the North Apennines area. We went to Cutigliano, and we drove into the town square, and there were about 3 or 4 people sitting on a bench in the sun in front of the hotel. And I said to my friend, whose name was Walter Carpenetti, but we called him Bud, I said, Bud, why don't we go over to there and ask those people about that villa, because I'd like to take you up there and get the view up the valley where the battle was. Mm-hmm. And so we went up, and there were 3 elderly ladies. And he said to them in Italian, this man, pointing to me, was an American captain here in 1945, and there was a battle here up that valley, and he wanted to find the villa that was on the other side. And the ladies, the Italians often talk with their hands. No, the battle was on this side of the valley, not over there. And I said to Bud, that's true, that's where the battle was, but we watched it from the other side. Mm-hmm. And there was a man there. And he said, that person is right. I was working in that villa. I was 16 years old, and I was on the kitchen crew. And I saw those officers up there with their field glasses watching that battle.
Oh my gosh.
So we went up, they took us up to the 4th floor. It had been converted from a private villa to a hotel, and there was a road up to it. And the man said, well, I'll lead you up there, and he did. We drove our little car up to the hotel and got rooms and stayed there overnight. And then I had never been up to Abitone, which is the crest of the ridge. Mm-hmm. So that evening, we drove up there and got a good view of Abitone. Well, anyhow, that's our first engagement. Mm-hmm. And then we moved along, and I think our first major engagement was Belvedere. And you probably heard the story of River Ridge and how it related. I was not really aware because my battalion, if you look at the book that's in the Resource Center called, or in the PX, called the Campaign in Italy, it outlines it right at the beginning, the approach that George Hayes, General Hayes, took. He recognized that Belvedere, which had twice been taken by the Fifth Army, the Americans, and twice they had been driven off by heavy German counterattacks. He recognized that the vulnerability of the troops that held Belvedere was tremendous because of the location of Riva Ridge right across the valley from it and overlooked it. And on that trip that I took with my friend Bud Carpenetti in 1996, we drove up to the top of Riva Ridge. We went around behind the ridge, came up on the top of it, and hiked about a mile out to the face of it. And I was astounded. The view that the Germans had of what we were doing was superb. And Hayes had the perspicacity to recognize that, and from the beginning of his planning of the attack on Belvedere, realized that the first thing that had to happen was to capture Riva Ridge. And he designated the 1st Battalion or he designated the 86th Regiment to take Riva Ridge, and particularly a battalion that had some expert climbers. And they climbed Riva Ridge the night before our attack and wiped out the whole contingent on the top of the ridge.
The 87th was with the 85th on the attack on
87th
Belvedere.
and the 85th did Belvedere. The 87th on the left and the 86th on the right. And my headquarters, or my battalion headquarters, and my own center of focus was at the village of Kerchola, which is the base of Belvedere. And I've been there a couple of times since. When I went there in '96 with Bud Carpenetti, well, there's a church on the left of the main street that goes through the tiny little village. There's a church and a big high steeple. And then there's, on the right, there are some houses. And my headquarters was in one of those houses. And some of the people from the battalion went up to the top of the church, of the steeple. The Germans could see them through. And they had an 88mm gun. The 88s were the most dangerous weapons. For us, they were artillery pieces, 88mm, which is a little bigger than our 75. And they're high velocity and low, almost flat trajectory. With their mortars and with their howitzers, which are arched shells, you could hear them. When they were fired, you could hear the shells coming through the air. But with the 88s, bang! Almost instantly, the explosion took place after the shell left the muzzle of the piece.
What about the screaming Mimis?
Pardon?
The screaming Mimis.
Yeah. Well, I think the screaming Mimis were mines. Mines that whistled when they blew up. I don't know, but I know that what the 88 was. Because I was subjected to that shelling more than once. Anyhow, they fired on that steeple, and two of our officers were wounded. One of them was Penrose. He got something in his leg and his knee, as I recall. And the other one was Jim Hayes, George J. Hayes, the son of the general. And he was a lieutenant in B Company. And the captain of B Company, his name was Swedberg. All three of them were up there in that tower. And that 88 came in, and two of them were wounded. George Hayes, I called him George at that time, but later I met him, and he goes by the name of Jim. His middle name is James, George Hayes. A piece of shrapnel went into his helmet, and it creased the top of his head. And there was quite a bit of bleeding from his scalp, but it didn't penetrate his skull. But I had to call up the division headquarters and got the general on the line and said, "I'm sorry to tell you that your son has just been hit, but he's okay. He has some kind of a superficial head wound." That's the last we saw of him. And Penrose went to the hospital, and the major hospital serving our wounded people was at Livorno. And he went back to the hospital in Livorno, and I got some leave.
Was that the base hospital then?
I can't tell you. It was a major hospital. Probably was the base hospital. Certainly was the base hospital for the 10th Mountain Division. I don't know if it probably served other 5th Army troops as well. Certainly was the base hospital for the 10th Mountain Division. I don't know if it probably served other 5th Army troops as well. But we had, between the Belvedere operation and our final push at north of Castellano on the 14th of April, between those two times, we had some leave time. And the colonel allowed me to take a Jeep and drive to Rome.
All the way to Rome.
Yeah, but I went, and part of the justification that I gave him for taking the Jeep was that I would go to Livorno and visit our wounded people in the hospital there. And I visited Penrose and others there, and went to Rome and with some of the other officers from the battalion, and then drove back. Then there were several actions. There were famous names in our personal battalion history. Pietro Calora, Gaggio Montano, and then of course Castellano. Castellano was a major strong point. And right beyond Castellano, about 5 kilometers, there's a place called, it was the single worst day that we ever had in battle. It was the 14th of April, a day or two after Roosevelt died. And that Roosevelt death had a big impact. After all, he was the commander-in-chief and tremendously popular president in his 4th term.
Do you remember how old you were when he was first elected?
Pardon?
Do you remember how old you were when he was first elected?
Yes, I can tell you exactly. He was first elected in 1932 and commenced holding office in March of 1933. And I was born in 1919, so I was 14 years old.
8th grader then?
Yeah, no, I skipped the 8th grade.
Oh.
I was promoted from the 7th to high school. I was a freshman. And my mother died that year. And that was a pretty traumatic event in my family history.
Yeah.
Just a sudden death. I came home from school. I was a freshman in high school. It was in the early fall, September, I think. And my father was ill. He was in bed with the flu and feeling miserable. And I walked into the house. My older brothers were gone from Juneau, and there was only my younger sister and I at home. And she was doubled up on a bed, holding herself like this and in great pain. And the first thing she said to me was, "I don't want to die."
Oh.
She was about 55 years old. And then she said, take care of your sisters. And I rushed into their bedroom where my father was and said, Mother's really sick. And he was a little put out with me for getting him out of bed when he felt so miserable. He went in the next room and realized how terribly serious it was, and called the ambulance. And the last time I saw her alive, and she died the next day.
Was it appendicitis?
No, it was peritonitis. I don't think it was from an appendix. I think it was probably from a bleeding ulcer. But it was before the days of antibiotics, before penicillin or any antibiotics, and the doctors there performed surgery, but they couldn't clean out the pus in her belly, and she was gone. Anyhow, I was telling you about the Battle of Crochola, and then this interval when I drove to Rome, saw Penrose in the hospital in Livorno, and I had an interesting time in Rome. There were four captains. There was Swedberg, who was the company commander of B Company. There was a man named Steve Preston, who was one of my closest friends. Both of those are dead now. And Steve had been in charge of the Mule Company. And I've forgotten what position he was holding. I think at that point he was the company commander of C Company. And there was another officer by the name of Bob Boyer, who was the first lieutenant, and later took command of C Company. And we had a nice time for 2 or 3 days in Rome. When we left Rome, I had, for me, a very disturbing experience. I was driving the Jeep. We had made a visit to the Vatican, and I paid an Italian boy 50 lira or something to watch the Jeep while I went into the Vatican. We had an audience with the Pope, went to the treasure room and toured the Vatican. Came back out and there was nobody in the square, including the little boy, and everything loose on the Jeep was stripped. Anyhow, we drove back and we were driving. They had flown down, the other three, and I had driven the Jeep. We went to the airport, I think it's called Campiano or something, outside of Rome. I'm going down the road, 2-lane road, and there was a concrete block in the center and a board, so there was only one lane. And there was an oncoming great big British lorry. And I misjudged that I had time to get past that block. I should have stopped, but I didn't. To get past that block, and the lorry didn't slow down. So the two of us were occupying that one lane. And the hubcap on his wheels was about that high. Caught the mirror of the Jeep and folded it back against the Jeep.
Thank God that was the only thing that happened.
And I pulled off to the right and sat and caught my breath, and the other guys thought, Jesus Christ. They almost met him.
Yeah, right.
But nobody was hurt. The canvas, it also caught the brace that held the canvas roof. The canvas dropped down.
Was that your only near-death experience in Italy?
No, I had a closer experience, but not from driving. Anyhow, we got back, and then our next big battle was the one just beyond Casteldano. From the top of this was the final push of the campaign that began on the 14th day of April, from the top of Mount Della Spey, which is just behind. And on the left of Della Spey, where the road, so here's Della Spey, and then there's cleft where the road goes through, and there's another ridge behind it. Down below it in the valley is Rocca Coroneta, which is a kind of spire of rock that stands up in the middle of the valley. And I was up on the top of Delos Bay, but the major battle took place where the road went through that cleft. And there's a farmhouse there, which is called, I'll remember it in a minute. When we went there, Bud Carpenetti and I, in '96, we tried to find it on a map. I thought it was a village, but it wasn't. It was just a set of farmhouses. Torre Ussi, Torre, which is the Italian word for land, and Ussi, I-U-S-S-I, and that's the name of the family that had occupied those farm buildings for hundreds of years, literally. And we lost a minimum of 150 men dead on that road. The highway was strewn with bodies. I walked up to the road, I came down off the mountain, walked over to the road, and I saw a pair of trousers lying there. And it was the man who's been cut right in two in the middle. A mortar shell hit him and blew off that for half of his body.
So was it mostly shelling that was doing the damage?
It was the bloodiest day of the war for the 87th. I don't know what it was for the other regiments, but...
it was for the other regiments as well.
It was horrific.
The Germans were desperate by then.
Pardon?
The Germans were desperate by then.
That's right. And this was the last major strong point of defense. You know what, KK? It's 20 after 11, and I'm going on a cruise.
Okay.
At 11:30.
Okay.
But we should be back by 3 if you want to continue.
Okay. Well,
I'll look for you.
look for me. But thank you very much so far. It's fascinating.
Should I look at the resource center or?